There is a moment you have had at the feeder, more than once, though you may not have marked it as anything unusual. You step outside with the refill bag, or just to check the weather, and a bird that has been coming to your yard for weeks does something the others do not. It does not flare off into the hedge at the first creak of the door. It watches you cross the yard, tracks the particular way you walk, and settles back onto the perch before you have even finished filling the tray. You assumed this was simple habituation, the same slow fading of alarm that happens to any animal that gets used to a repeated, harmless sound. That is not what happened. That bird did not get used to noise in general. It learned you, specifically, as a category, separate from every other tall moving shape that has ever crossed its territory, and it has been building a file on you since the day you first appeared. Welcome back to the bird's lore. Today's episode is about the moment a bird recognizes you, individually, apart from every other human it has ever seen, and about how much more it already knows about you than that single moment of calm would suggest. If this is your first time here, subscribe, because next week's episode picks up exactly where this one leaves off, with what happens when that same bird decides to warn its own offspring about you. By the end of this one, you will understand why the birds outside your window are not reacting to a threat category called human. They are reacting to a specific individual they have already filed, judged, and remembered, and the file is more detailed than most people would guess. The mechanism underneath that calm feeder moment is facial recognition, and it is not a metaphor borrowed loosely from human cognition. It is a documented, testable capacity. Research conducted at the University of Washington on American crows demonstrated that crows captured and banded by researchers wearing a specific mask would, years later, scold and mob any person wearing that same mask on sight, while ignoring people wearing a neutral mask standing right beside them. The crows were not reacting to clothing, or gait, or general human shape. They were reacting to a face, held in memory, retrieved instantly on a second exposure, separated by years. That is the same basic apparatus at work in your backyard Chickadee, or your Cardinal, scaled to a smaller brain, but running on the same principle. A specific human face, cross-referenced against a running record of whether that face has ever meant danger. Before you ever noticed the bird holding still instead of flushing, that judgment had already been made, repeatedly, below the threshold of anything you would have seen. Every time you walked into that yard, the bird was collecting data it never showed you. It was noting your pace, whether you moved in straight, predictable lines or erratic ones, whether you looked directly at it or let your gaze slide past, whether your hands stayed low and slow or moved in the fast overhead sweep that resembles a hawk's stoop. None of this happened in a single dramatic encounter. It accumulated, visit after visit, the way a reputation accumulates before anyone says it out loud. By the time you saw the bird hold its position, instead of bolting, you were not witnessing the start of trust. You were witnessing the outcome of a decision that had already been finalized dozens of exposures earlier. Not every instance of a bird holding still around you means the same thing, and this is where most people misread what they are seeing. A bird that stays low and freezes with its feathers slightly flattened, eyes fixed on you without blinking away, is not comfortable. It is running a threat assessment in real time and has not yet resolved it. The same posture it would hold toward a hawk shadow crossing the yard. A bird that continues feeding, glancing up at you only briefly between bites, has already resolved you as low risk and is spending only the minimum attention required to keep tracking your position. And a bird that turns and holds direct eye contact for a full second or more, rather than the flicking half-glances of ordinary vigilance, is doing something closer to acknowledgement than assessment. Sustained direct eye contact is unusual in prey-postured animals, because in the wild, holding a predator's gaze rather than breaking it and fleeing has no survival value unless the animal has already concluded the source of that gaze is not a predator at all. Inside the bird, This entire process runs through structures built for exactly this kind of task. Birds possess a well-developed hippocampus, the same brain region responsible for spatial and associative memory in mammals, and in food-caching species like black-capped chickadees. That hippocampus is measurably larger relative to brain size than in species that do not need to remember thousands of hidden locations. The same memory architecture used to recall which of hundreds of seed caches has already been emptied is repurposed to store a running association between your face, your gait, your voice, and a safety rating. Work out of Cornell Lab of Ornithology on individual recognition in songbirds has shown that this associative memory can persist across seasons, meaning a chickadee that filed you as safe last winter is not starting over when it sees you again in spring. It is retrieving a record, not forming a new impression. What changes after that moment of held eye contact is not small. A bird that has filed you as safe will nest closer to structures you frequent, will resume feeding activity faster after you have passed through the yard compared to how it reacts to an unfamiliar person, and in several studied corvid populations will pass that same assessment to its offspring, teaching young birds through direct observation and vocal cueing which humans in the area are worth fearing and which are not. Princeton University research on scrubjay social learning has documented exactly this kind of socially transmitted threat information, moving from adult to juvenile without the juvenile ever having a negative encounter with the human in question itself. Your reputation, in other words, does not stay contained to the individual bird you have personally met. It can outlive that bird's attention span and travel forward into a generation of birds who have never directly tested you at all. What this means is that the empty-seeming calm of your yard is not empty. Every bird moving through it is running a continuous, cross-referenced ledger on every repeated presence that enters that space, and you are one of the entries. The chickadee, at the feeder, is not reacting to a human. It is reacting to you, filed under a name it does not have a word for, but remembers with the same precision it uses to remember which branch holds a hidden sunflower seed. The Cardinal, that lets you get within 6 feet before it moves, has run that same calculation and returned a different number for you than it would for a stranger. None of this required you to do anything deliberate. It required only repetition, consistency, and enough time for a small, capable memory system to do what it has always done in the wild: sort the world into what has hurt it and what has not, and never lose track of the difference. Picture that same feeder moment again, the bird turning to hold your eye before returning to the seed. You know now that nothing about that pause was casual. The chickadee working the tray beside it is running the same recognition system that once let a crow identify a masked stranger years after a single encounter. Only here, the years of exposure have already resolved in your favor. The cardinal watching from the hedge is not deciding whether to trust you. It decided that already some visit you never noticed, and what you are seeing now is the record confirming what it already knew. You are not a stranger to that yard. You are a known quantity, filed, remembered, and quietly trusted by creatures with a memory built to never forget who kept them safe.